What if I told you that one poor man, armed with nothing more than a hammer and a chisel, did what governments had failed to do for decades? People laughed at him. They called him crazy. Some even said he had lost his mind. But 22 years later, those same people walked through the road he carved with his own hands. This is not a legend. This is not fiction. This is the unbelievable true story of Dashrath Manjhi, the man the world would later call the Mountain Man. Before we begin, ask yourself one question: how far would you go for someone you truly love? Because the answer to that question changed history forever. In a small village called Galar, in the Indian state of Bihar, life was brutally difficult. The village was surrounded by a giant mountain. That mountain wasn't just a piece of land. It was a wall separating families from hospitals, children from schools, workers from jobs, and sick people from the only chance they had to survive. To reach the nearest town, villagers had to walk around the mountain for nearly 55 kilometers. For rich people, it was an inconvenience. For poor people, it was often a death sentence. Among those villagers lived a poor laborer named Dashrath Manjhi. He owned almost nothing. No money, no land, no power. Every sunrise meant another day of hard labor just to earn enough food for his family. Yet despite the poverty, there was one thing that made his life meaningful. His wife, Falguni. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. But to Dashrath, she was his entire world. Every morning she walked long distances carrying food and water to him while he worked under the burning sun. Their life was difficult, but they faced every hardship together. Neither of them knew that one ordinary day would change everything forever. One ordinary afternoon, the sun burned fiercely over the rocky hills. Dashrath was working far from home, breaking stones to earn a few coins. As always, Falguni picked up a small container of food and began walking toward him. The journey wasn't easy. She had to climb narrow mountain paths, cross sharp rocks, and carefully balance every step. She had walked this dangerous route hundreds of times before. But that day, fate had something else planned. One wrong step, one loose rock, and in an instant, she slipped. She tumbled down the rocky slope, her body striking the stones again and again. When nearby villagers heard her cries, they rushed to help. Someone ran to call Dashrath. The moment he saw his wife lying on the ground, covered in blood, his heart shattered. He picked her up in his arms and began running. There was only one hope: the hospital. But the nearest hospital was on the other side of the mountain. And the mountain stood between life and death. There was no road, no ambulance, no bridge, no shortcut. The only route was the long path around the mountain, about 55 kilometers. Every passing minute made her condition worse. Dashrath kept moving forward, refusing to give up. He prayed, he begged, he hoped, but hope could not make the journey shorter. By the time they reached medical help, it was too late. Falguni could not be saved. The woman who had shared every hardship of his life was gone. For days, Dashrath barely spoke. He sat in silence, staring at the mountain. Many people believed he was grieving. They were right, but they didn't know that something much bigger was growing inside him. He wasn't angry at fate. He wasn't angry at God. He was angry at the mountain. To everyone else, it was just a mountain. To Dashrath, it had stolen the love of his life. That night, he made a decision that sounded impossible. He would cut a road through the mountain. Not with machines, not with workers, not with government money, with his own two hands. The next morning, he sold the only valuable possessions he had so he could buy a hammer and a chisel. When the villagers saw him striking the giant mountain, they burst into laughter. "Have you gone mad? One man can't break a mountain. You'll die before you make a dent." Every insult echoed across the valley. But Dashrath never answered. He simply lifted his hammer and struck the mountain again, and again, and again. No one realized it then, but history had just begun. The first day, his hammer barely left a mark. The second day, the mountain looked exactly the same. The third day, People laughed even harder. To everyone else, it was impossible. But to Dashrath, every single strike meant one step closer to making sure no family would suffer the way his had. So he kept going. Every morning before sunrise, he picked up his hammer and chisel. Every evening, he returned home exhausted, his hands bleeding and his body covered in dust. The mountain didn't care. It never became softer. It never became easier. Yet Dashrath refused to stop. Days became months. Months became years. The villagers continued to mock him. Some called him insane. Some said grief had destroyed his mind. Children followed him just to watch and laugh. Visitors came to see the crazy man fighting a mountain. But every insult only made his determination stronger. Sometimes, there wasn't enough food in his house. Sometimes, he worked as a laborer during the day just to earn money, then spent the remaining hours cutting the mountain. He lived with hunger. He lived with pain. But he never lived without purpose. Year after year, the mountain slowly began to change. At first, only tiny cracks appeared. Then small rocks started falling. Little by little, a narrow path became visible. For the first time, people stopped laughing. Instead, they started watching. Could this impossible dream actually come true? Nature tested him again and again. Heavy rains washed away weeks of hard work. The scorching summer sun burned his skin. Winter nights froze his aching hands. His tools often broke. His body grew weaker. But every time life knocked him down, he stood up with the same hammer in his hand. He had made a promise. Not to the world, but to the memory of the woman he loved. And he was determined to keep it. Years passed. The narrow path became wider. The impossible slowly became visible. The same villagers who once mocked him began bringing him water. Some silently encouraged him. Others simply watched in disbelief, because they had finally realized something. The mountain wasn't defeating Dashrath anymore. Dashrath was defeating the mountain. With every strike, he proved one timeless truth. Great miracles are rarely built in a single day. They are built through thousands of ordinary days, when a person refuses to quit. 22 years. That was the price Dashrath Manjhi paid for a single dream. By now, many people no longer saw him as the crazy man. They saw something far more powerful, a man who refused to surrender. Every blow of the hammer had slowly carved away the impossible. The massive mountain that once blocked an entire village was no longer untouched. It had a road running straight through its heart. When the final sections of rock were cleared, the villagers stood in silence. Many of them walked through the passage for the very first time. Some couldn't believe what they were seeing. Others had tears in their eyes. The journey that once required traveling around the mountain for nearly 55 kilometers became dramatically shorter through the new passage. What had taken hours could now be reached much more easily. Children could get to school faster. Workers could reach nearby towns without making exhausting detours. Most importantly, people needing urgent medical care now had a much shorter route than before. For the villagers, it wasn't just a road. It was hope. News of the incredible achievement spread beyond the village. Journalists arrived. Photographers captured the road. People from different parts of the country came to meet the man who had challenged a mountain with nothing but a hammer and a chisel. The same people who had once laughed now shook his hand with respect. Some even called him a hero, but Dashrath never claimed to be one. Whenever people praised him, he spoke simply. He said he had only done what needed to be done. He wasn't searching for fame. He wasn't chasing money. He only wanted to make sure that no one else lost a loved one because a mountain stood in the way. Years later, governments, schools, filmmakers, and millions of people around the world recognized his extraordinary determination. His story became a symbol of courage, not because he was born powerful, but because he refused to let pain become the end of his story. The mountain had taken away the person he loved most. Instead of choosing revenge, he chose purpose. Instead of giving up, he chose action. And instead of complaining about the world, he changed it with his own hands. Dashrath Manjhi never became one of the world's richest men. He never lived in a palace. He never had powerful connections. But he left behind something far greater than wealth. He left behind hope. The road he carved through the mountains still stands as a reminder that one determined person can change the lives of thousands. In 2007, Dashrath Manjhi passed away after a long battle with illness. But even after his death, people continue to walk through the path he created. Every traveler who uses that road becomes part of his legacy. Think about it for a moment. Most of us give up after a few failures. Some give up after a few months. Others stop because people laugh at them. Dashrath Manjhi was laughed at for years. He worked through hunger. He worked through pain. He worked through loneliness. And he continued for 22 years. Not because someone guaranteed success, but because he believed that quitting would change nothing. His greatest victory wasn't breaking a mountain. It was breaking the belief that one ordinary person cannot make a difference. Every one of us has a mountain in life. For some, it's poverty. For others, it's fear, failure, illness, or self-doubt. We often wait for someone else to solve our problems. We wait for better opportunities, better timing, better luck. Dashrath Manjhi teaches us something different. He teaches us that the first step is always ours to take. One small effort may seem meaningless today, just like one strike of his hammer seemed meaningless on the first day. But thousands of small efforts, repeated with patience, can reshape an entire future. The world remembers Dashrath Manjhi not because he was the strongest man alive, but because he refused to stop. And perhaps, that is the greatest lesson of all. If your dream feels impossible today, remember the man who stood before a mountain with nothing but a hammer and a chisel, and refused to walk away, because sometimes, the biggest obstacles don't disappear on their own. They move, only when someone is brave enough to keep striking them, one blow at a time. Thank you for listening. If this true story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more incredible real-life stories that prove ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.